Okay, so I'm going to put the beer. That's always an important place to start. Well, thank you very much, everyone, for coming along this evening. I've had a really interesting exercise-filled day, walking all around Leighton Buzzard and then Slade, and I've also learnt an important lesson, which is not to say that I'm going to nail anything to anything in this pub. Apparently that gets you into lots of trouble, so I won't be talking about that. But what's really exciting to see is here, as I'm seeing around the country, is the way that the Green Party is really thriving and growing at enormous speed. And we've got some amazing figures. You may recall, you might have seen a little bit of media coverage about the thing called the leader debates next year. And being left out of that seems to have gained us in 5 days 1,000 new members. Because in that week, in 5 days, we got 1,000 new members. And our previous 1,000 new members before that had taken 10 days. And that was a 10% increase in the whole membership of the Green Party. We went from 20,000 to 22,000 in a little over 2 weeks. So by this rate, we'll be hitting sort of 100,000 about Christmas if we keep going exponentially at the same rate, which may not actually happen. But the fact is, I've always got the media asking me, why is this so? Why is this happening? And at one level, I've got absolutely no idea. But at another level, what I really sense as I go around the country is that people are really fed up. And actually I said this on Women's Hour a week or so back, and it was interesting that that was what the Twitter sphere picked up, was people are fed up. Natalie said people are fed up, and she's right. Because we've got a society, an economy, that's just not working for the common good. It's only working for the few, for the 1%, the richest people. And that's why we're saying we've got to change that. And of course we've also got a society in which so many people are struggling. 1 million people going to food banks last year just to feed themselves. They had to rely on charity. And 20% of workers on less than a living wage. They can be working full time, but they don't earn enough to feed their families. So those are our economic and our social crises. But of course what we've also got is an environmental crisis. Because the astonishing thing is, despite the fact that so many people are struggling, so many people are switching the heating off in midwinter and shivering, despite all of that, all of us collectively, no matter how you live as an individual, we're using the resources of 3 planets every year. But we've only got 1 planet. And we have to really cut back. But we've also got lots of people whose lives need to be lifted up, who need to have access to more resources. And so we've got this environmental crisis. And then of course we've got a political crisis. We have 3 business as usual parties, the biggest political parties, who are basically saying, oh, we just need to tinker around a little bit with this. We're going to leave big multinational companies not paying their taxes. It came out today that for the 2nd year Facebook has paid 0 tax in Britain, and that's on top of Amazon, which last year paid 0.01% of its turnover in tax, i.e. no tax at all in Britain. And if you think about it, I bet down that road today there's been a couple of lorries travelling carrying parcels from Amazon, and we've all paid to help maintain that road, but Amazon isn't paying to maintain that road. They're a parasite on our society, sucking out profits and not putting money back. And so we've got 3 largest political parties who aren't saying anything about that. They're not really saying anything about the fact that the financial sector, and you can listen to a really radical voice here, the Bank for International Settlements, which is a UN organisation, a UN type organisation, and it said we're closer to a financial crash now than we were in 2007. So we've got a whole political system that's not addressing this. And it's only the Green Party that's making a couple of simple statements. It's saying that rich individuals and multinational companies have to pay their way. They have to pay their taxes, they have to pay their workers fair wages. And we have to ensure that everybody in this society has access to the resources for a decent quality of life. No one should be living in fear. No one should not know where their next meal's coming from. And we've got to do all of this very soon within the environmental limits of this planet, because it's the only planet we've got. So we've got a big challenge, but we're growing fast, And if we look up to Scotland, we can see how fast politics can change. Politics in Scotland went from, it seemed like that, from, oh, it's this boring referendum, and yeah, to excitement, engagement. 97% of people enrolled to vote, 85% of people voting. And what we really need to do for the future of British politics, British society, is we have to actually build that kind of excitement around the 2015 election. So this can be a chance to have real change. And that real change is what the Green Party is offering. And of course I've got lots of political journalists at the moment asking me what's going to happen in the election, and I've got two answers to that. If things stay much the same as they are, obviously we want to re-elect Caroline Lucas as the first priority, but Bristol West looks very exciting, Norwich South looks very exciting, we could grow the number of Green MPs. But the other alternative answer is politics could just break wide open in 2015. Imagine for a second what would happen if 85% of people turned out to vote in this coming election, after decades of turnouts around the 60% mark. We could just blow this wide open and do everything differently. And one of the things I'm often asked, of course, about the rise of UKIP, and one of the positive things for us about the rise of UKIP, is there could be a lot of four-way marginal seats. And you might win a seat with not much more than 25% of the vote. And it's a lot easier to get to 25%, 27%, than it is to get to the traditional 37, 40% you need to win a seat under the old days. So things are really changing, there's real opportunities, and it's great to see so many people here tonight. I hope that all of you will be coming along and perhaps delivering a few leaflets, getting involved in social media, retweeting things, doing whatever it is that you can to help change the nature of British politics. And if there's one thing we really need to do, what we need to do is make politics something that everybody does, not something that's done to them. And that's the green politics we need to have. Thank you.
I'll take Michael, and then the chap in the blue t-shirt at the front, and then the chap with the red t-shirt at the back. Whoever he is.
Okay,
Michael.
Your ideas about the nationalisation of the railways, and basically about privatisation in general. To me, privatisation has always been the biggest theft of public assets, or assets, since Henry VIII sold off the monasteries. So quite honestly, and had much the same effect. The fact is, we've now got a situation where it's okay if, no, public corporations in this country aren't okay, but it's all right for EDF to run part of our electricity system. It's okay for Deutsche Bahn to run it, and SNCF to run part of our railway network, but we can't have our own British-based public corporation to do it. That's giving us some kind of national inferiority complex. And this is from a country that invented the railways and pioneered them. What are your views on how you're going to get this back to public ownership?
Okay, well, to start off with talking about the basic philosophy of privatisation, and the fact is actually what we have is something that the British public by and large understand very well. Privatisation is built on three things. It's built on pumping public money into private hands, it's built on slashing the pay and condition of workers, and it's built on cutting the quality of the services. That's what privatisation means. And actually, if you went out there in the daytime in the street and did a survey, most people would get that. But we've got a government that's still wedded to the ideology that somehow or other there's some sort of private sector efficiency. And we all know that's absolute tosh. But we've got to first of all really take on that ideology and challenge it and point out that it's simply the facts don't back it up. Then what we've got to do in terms of the railways, Caroline Lucas, the Green MP, has a private members bill now before Parliament, and it's very simple how you bring the railways back into public hands. It's actually a really easy one of all of these things, because what you can do is simply allow the train operating companies' contracts to lapse, and as they do, bring them back into public hands. And of course not sell off East Coast, as the government is now planning to do, even though it's the most profitable railway and it's in public hands. So what we need to do is bring our railways back into public hands, so they run for the good of passengers, not for the good of shareholders. And there's a really good report called Rethinking Rail for anyone who wants to know more about this. And basically we could save more than £1 billion a year by bringing the railways back into public hands. And that's the kind of figure that's sort of huge up there. What does it mean? It means the equivalent of 16% off rail fares. And given we've got the most expensive rail fares in Western Europe, it'd be a good place to start.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The chap in the blue t-shirt.
Yeah, are you guys sort of familiar with, and what do you see as the future of things like 38 Degrees, Change.org, Avaz, and all of that sort of electronics for people to have their say in kind of like an evolving structure for politics and new age stuff, because then everyone can have their sort of fair say. Like.
Thank you. You've just given me a great chance to advertise anyone who hasn't signed yet the Change.org position to get me onto the leader debates. It was somewhere near 200,000 last I looked, so if you haven't signed yet, you could be the 200,000. But it ties to what I finished with my initial comments with, that politics should be something you do, and technology gives the option to really open it up, to be really accessible to anyone. And I think one of the things that technology does is it does open politics to people for whom, for practical reasons, it can be really hard. In Scotland, there was I thought really exciting to see a group called Carers for Yes, which was family carers who were looking after family members in their own homes. Some of the most exploited, hard-worked people in our society, £60 a week for working often 24/7, indefinitely far into the future. And yet they got themselves organised as a group to campaign for a yes vote. And that's what we need to see, every group of society, everyone involved in politics. And technology gives us lots of mechanisms that make that much more possible than it was 10 years ago.
So you guys encourage that? Because I know I've seen that some at first they were sort of worried, and they were sort of I think it's David Babs at 38 Degrees, and they were sort of like being apologetic almost, and they're like, you guys don't realise you're like a £100 gorilla or something like that floating around the room or something.
They are. The big challenge is that it's important that that's not seen as the end. Because, it's great to sign the petition and share it with your mates and whatever, but we also then need to get a decent percentage of those people actually, out on the streets, like as in Occupy now, and I haven't caught up with what's happened at Occupy this afternoon, but, we need to then transfer that into other realms as well, not just stay in the virtual.
Can I just say that this afternoon when we were outside the station in Leighton Buzzard, one of the things you don't get with an online petition is a chance to talk to people about what you're concerned about, and for them to talk to you. And it's actually part of the important thing about making politics a two-way thing. It is about actually engaging with people, real people, in the streets, on the doorsteps, and outside this railway station in the cold. Mark.
Yes. Several years ago, no, I'm fine. Through the Kyoto, we set out a policy, the government set out a policy to reduce greenhouse gas emissions through the release of refrigerants and stuff like that. We're one of the only countries, certainly in Europe, mainly in the world, that are actually complying with that, and we spend millions and millions of pounds of our taxpayers' money trying to comply with that. No other countries are doing that. What are we going to do to address that? Why are we wasting our money on a policy that we're the only ones that actually comply with it and nobody else does?
But I think, first of all, I don't entirely agree with the...
I've got a bit of inside knowledge, I'm in the trade.
The premises of the question that no one else is doing anything and that we're racing ahead. If you look at it in terms of renewable energy, the percentage of our Britain's energy that comes from renewable energy, we rank 26th out of 28 OECD countries. In terms of percentage of energy from renewable energy, we can proudly boast that we're ahead of Malta and Luxembourg.
That's fine.
In terms of renewable energy.
Fine, but that wasn't my question.
Okay, and I'm going to come to the second part of your question, which is why. Now, it's true to say that Britain only contributes 2% of the world's carbon greenhouse gas emissions. But there's two things about that. One is the fact that a huge amount of what's up there now we put up there. We started industrialising before any other country. The historic emissions we are responsible for a very high percentage of. Now that's a moral responsibility that you might that's fine, mate, you don't really have to do that you can either accept or not. But I'll park that even. But what I'll also say is that Britain has far more focus on it in the world in terms of media, in terms of attention, than it does relative to its size. And what we do doesn't just impact in Britain. There are people in US, in Germany, even brave people in China who are pushing very hard, campaigning very hard to cut their emissions. And every step we take, everything that we do, has the real potential to strengthen their arm, to strengthen efforts there. But the other side that I'd also say is the question of how much we're being left behind. This is the technology of the future. This is the technology we have to have. And if you take the example of tidal power, there's a proposal now to build the first of what's planned to be 5 tidal lagoons in Cardiff Bay. These could provide 9% of our electricity within the next 10 years. And this is a British developed technology. The first one will be more than 76% British elements. And this is a whole new industry. Jobs for technicians, jobs for designers, jobs for manufacturers and builders. And this could be Britain's export to the world. We could develop this whole new technology and be ahead of the game as we're behind on so many others. And if we do that, then that's one of the alternatives to that is fracking. So we can import American technology from states where there's no regulation at all to total cowboy technology, bring the American technicians here, their technology here, and get very little benefit for ourselves. So there is positive, investing in renewables, investing in energy conservation is a positive for Britain.
Okay. We'll take another couple of questions from people. Okay. Take some of that and then I shall take them.
One right to your right too.
Oh, sorry.
You won't see that. There.
Gary, okay.
That's 3.
Okay. In that order, I'll go in a clockwise order.
Okay. It's very loosely framed, if I'm honest. It's more of an idea than a question. But during the 1980s, Mr. Reagan and Mrs. Thatcher deregulated the financial sector, which led to a quite horrendous rise in ratios of mortgage lending from banks and some reasonably irresponsible behaviour, which has so far managed to drive house prices through the roof compared to working wages. Leading on to having to have 2 people going to work, then crippling themselves through childcare payments, and so the cycle continues. Is there anything that can be done to bring that under control?
Okay. One of the things that we have to do to say about the financial sector to start off with is that it's way too big. And yet, despite the fact that it's enormous, it's not meeting the actual needs of the real economy. It's actually, most of the financial sector is the gambling sector, is the complex financial instruments, is the things that broke the global economy last time and quite likely will break the global economy in a very short period of time in the future. So where we need to start is to say we need a much smaller banking sector that actually serves the needs of the real economy. That's the place to start. And what we say in the Green Party, there's some really technical things about let's utterly separate the gambling side of banking from the retail side of banking, so that if the gambling side goes belly up, it doesn't affect the retail. But actually we say much broader than this. If anyone who's interested in the detail, Molly Scott-Cater, our new MEP in the South West, has got a whole report on this that goes into a lot of detail. But basically what we say is no financial instrument should exist unless they can show that it creates more benefit than it outweighs the risks. And what you basically do in a stroke is get rid of much of the complex stuff. What we want to do is actually go back to making banking really boring. I'm old enough to remember, and some people in this room are old enough to remember, when the bank manager was a really boring figure. Solid, important in the town, but really quite dull. And actually that's where we need to go back to. And so running the banks, the financial sector, should basically work like the sewerage companies, the water companies, just supplying the stuff and taking away the mess and sorting things out, but nothing exciting and not a lot of money to be made. And that's the kind of basis as a place to start.
Thank you.
Given that quite a lot of UKIP's success, and there's what recently can be attributed to people buying into this idea that immigration is a massive problem and responsible for the strain on resources, what realistically can the Greens do to unravel that myth and try to help people who are currently buying into it realise what a very big red herring it is?
I think what I would do is start off by saying And it's, in a way, it's easier on the doorstep than it is in big broadcast settings. But on the doorstep, when someone says to you, I'm concerned about immigration, say, you know, what is it, what do you think that immigration's causing? Why are you concerned? And you'll usually get three answers, one of which is low wages, another of which is housing costs, overcrowded housing, my kids can't get a council house type answers, or you'll get the schools and hospitals are overcrowded. And what you need to do is pull those apart and say, first of all, low wages aren't caused by immigrants. No immigrant arrives on the steps of the White Cliff of Dover and says, I really want to work for really absolutely lousy pay and be exploited like anything, and, you know, not get the minimum wage or anything like that. We have low wages because we have an inadequate minimum wage, and the Green Party says the minimum wage should be a living wage. If you work full time, you should earn enough money to live on, and we've set a target for the minimum wage of £10 an hour by 2020, which is basically starting from living wage now and getting a 4% increase year on year on year. So we need to set decent wages, and then immigrants don't pull the wages down. It's companies that don't pay enough and low pay for government workers is what's pulling wages down. And then if you look at housing, housing's a whole complex subject itself, but one of the first things to say is that there's 250,000 empty houses in Britain, and a lot of them are up in places like on the Wirral, where I've walked down whole streets where there is boarded up, perfectly good houses in the middle of town, right near the bus routes, everything fine, but there's no jobs. So people can't stay there. So one of the first things we do is need to take pressure off the south of England, spread out regional development policy, don't build HS2, but build good local intra-regional east-west transport links that enable trade and people to communicate with each other across regions, not all focused on London. So we need regional development policy. We need to stop thinking of homes as though they're financial assets and turn them back into homes again. And that means, you know, a whole range of things, ranging from building lots more truly affordable housing. And affordable has become a much degraded word because in London, 80% of market rents counts as affordable. So there's a new development where a 4-bedroom flat, the affordable rent, you're going to need an income of 100k to rent the affordable flat. So, but actually genuinely affordable social housing rents, caps on rents from private landlords, and so security of tenure for private tenants so they've actually got a real home. So change the whole housing round. And then that third element of crowded schools and hospitals. Well, first of all, it's worth noting that our NHS is staffed by a very large number of immigrants, and if they all went away we wouldn't have an NHS. But also, again, this is particularly in the NHS, a lack of funding. There's been a lot of talk about that today. But also in terms of schools, basically local councils are not allowed to plan anymore. They have to wait until someone turns up and wants to start a free school. And even when they can see the baby bulge coming through, they can't do anything about it because they're not allowed to by Michael Gove and his followers. And so what you need to do when people say I'm concerned about immigration is actually pull it apart and say none of these things are being caused by immigration. And I think one of the things we really want to do is defend free movement of people within the EU. And, you know, it's really not understood nearly enough. There are almost an equal number of Britons in continental Europe as there are continental Europeans here. Now you could swap them all round, which would make hell out of a lot of people's lives, but would also be utterly pointless, and would actually leave us with a much poorer society because lots of the Britons of the continent are retirees who aren't working, and the people who are here, and don't let anyone tell you about people from Eastern Europe claiming benefits. People from the rest of Europe claim much less in benefits, not that there's anything wrong in claiming benefits, but claim less in benefits than native-born Britons do. Benefit tourism is an absolute myth. So there's lots of myths we need to take on, but we also need to take on and say simply immigrants are not the problem, and also the race to the bottom on immigration rhetoric that we've had is really dangerous, divisive and damaging. I was talking today about how this year, for the first time, the number of foreign students applying to British universities, and they bring with them vast amounts of money and also vast amounts of skills and potential for future business ties and links around the world. The first time this year, the number applying to British universities went down. And that's, at least in part, a function of the rhetoric that says you're not welcome here. And people are hearing you're not welcome here and they're going somewhere else. And that's the damaging thing that it's doing. and it's also deeply divisive. And I was up in Great Yarmouth speaking to a group that deals with Eastern European immigrants, and they were telling me that locals,
The more you pay, the more what you say.
okay, all right.
Maybe we should just have 1 minute. If you give Natalie a chance to finish this bit, I'll bring you in because I want to hear what you're saying. It's really important.
The
only problem is
digging at me. I mean,
no. The point is, I'd love to hear what you're saying, but the problem is, no. There's no problem you hearing what you're saying. But what we need to do is hear what Natalie's saying, and then that's absolutely fine. The problem is that having a discussion means that lots of people can't hear what Natalie's saying. And it'd be really good, and we'll take it in turns. I'm happy to bring you in a minute. Okay, it's okay. Okay, yeah, no worries, mate.
if I've been rude,
You're being
I apologise.
No, it's not about being rude. We just need to hear what people are saying, and we'll stop them. I'll bring you in next.
Well, maybe you should be listening to this discussion rather than this discussion.
Well,
because
maybe.
this is a real discussion. And this is a stage discussion.
Well, this is a question that we've just had from someone answering a question.
This is a
so if you want
party
to then ask
leader,
another
eh?
question, we can have a discussion about it. Yeah?
If I've been rude in this process, I do
No,
apologise.
you haven't been. That's
I'm
fine.
having a discussion over here, my friend.
So that's fine. That's fine. But if we can talk this, no, don't need to apologise. I'll bring you in next.
Okay.
If that's all right.
Okay, yeah, it's all right. I'm just gonna finish the story I was telling because I think it's important. Up in Great Yarmouth, we had a group that works with Eastern European workers, and they were reporting how their clients were reporting more and more verbal abuse and worse. And their clients were saying, "Oh, we don't report it to the police because that's what English people are like." And that, I think, is absolutely tragic, and something we really need to tackle, that rhetoric, and talk about it really importantly.
I was going to ask, will the Green Party be standing in the local elections in Linslade?
We certainly will be, but that's another question. If you understand, can you stay for a moment because we've got. Have you finished that? Yeah. Can I just? Yeah, we will definitely be standing in Linslade. We'll definitely be standing in Leighton Buzzard to give somebody a chance, an alternative to politics as usual. That's why. Excuse me. Chap in the corner whose name I don't get. I've seen you in a million times. Okay. Do you want to actually say what you said? Because we'd like to hear what you're saying.
Yeah,
but we're not. It's all about debate.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It's okay saying about minimum wage at £10 an hour. But who pays for it?
Okay,
You pay for it.
well, first of all, I was asked at the minimum wage of £10 an hour who pays. First of all, one of the things that people don't recognise perhaps is that it would save the Treasury, a living wage now would save the Treasury £2 billion a year, because people need less housing benefit and family tax credit, and they pay more in tax and national insurance. So if you say who pays for it, then actually the savings...
Hang on a second. You guys pay for that. So you're paying £3.20 for a pint of beer now. If you increase the minimum wage to £10, you might be paying £6 for a beer. You might be paying £1.80 for a pint of milk.
Well, I agree. Well, I think your numbers are a bit out, but I agree that a pint of beer could cost a little bit more.
You don't know.
But no.
You don't know those
But the fact is, if you think about this pub, and at the moment when the street sweepers outside finish work for the day, it's pretty well impossible for them to come in and have a pint, because if they're on the minimum wage, they can't afford to buy a pint.
No, you please.
I'm sorry, sir. I believe you can let me finish. And you know, people will be able to come in and afford to buy things more if you raise the minimum wage to a living wage. And it's a simple basic principle. If you work full time, you should earn enough money to live on. And at the moment that's seen as something of a radical statement, but actually when that statement was put to the British people, 76% of people agreed with it. So this is a bit like lots of things that we say that are seen as regarded as radical. Renationalising the railways. 67% of British people agree with that one. And a really interesting figure that you can use on the doorstep very often, a majority of Tory voters agree with renationalising the railways. So we need to restructure this society so that the people at the bottom get a decent quality of life, and that means the people at the top, and that's why the Green Party calls for a wealth tax. If you're worth more than £3 million, then you need to actually pay back into society so we can pay for public services.
So
Thank you. Hold on. Thank you.
What's the nationalisation of railways got to do with the minimum wage?
Hold on. You've had several goes, yeah? There's a few people who haven't had one question. If you want, hold on, you've had a couple of goes. If you want, we'll have a break in a bit and then you can come back with some more questions. But there's people
Hold on.
There are people.
What does the minimum wage got to do with the nationalisation
It's
of railways?
got to do with restructuring our society so that it works for the common good, not for the few. So the railways work for passengers, not shareholders.
Yeah, and that's got a lot to do with the minimum wage.
Hold on. We've got a few people. No, we've got a few people.
The rail track system where they were actually making a profit. Right, they were making a profit just before the halfway stage, and the biggest travesty in history is where everyone lost their pensions and stuff like that because the government turned around and went, "Oh no, we should have privatisation." Just about to make more money, right? Just about to make more money, and they clapped.
It's just like the East Coast.
They were making money. They were making money, but this is a privatised system. You're saying don't work.
The East Coast is publicly owned, is returning more money to the government than anything else, and the government is now selling it.
The point was they started off and they could borrow money up to the halfway stage, then they could pay it back. Don't get me wrong, I'm all for all this privatisation, keep it in the country. But rail track, to be fair, I work on the railways and I saw the improvements that they made. And that just before they got to the halfway stage, before they could turn around and go, hang on, they're going to make a profit now. Let's pull that under the rugs. People lost their pensions. Why hasn't that all come out?
Yeah.
Why are we talking about going back to privatisation, all that rubbish, when everyone's lost their income for their life? I know pensioners.
All right, okay,
I've got nothing
someone else has to have a go.
Okay. If you just answer that one, and then we'll bring the people who have been desperately wanted to ask questions. Okay. First of all, is that about the living wage? Because I know someone who might be asking about the living wage, and then I'll take you next, and then if you're okay, Gary, I'll take you a bit later. Okay, Parisa.
Basically, go to the living wage, go to their point of £10 an hour being too high. In my opinion, I sat down and worked out, if it was £10 an hour, I could, one, get a job which was in sociable hours, which means I can see my children more, because at the moment I'm working from 5 till 2 in the morning, which means when I do see my children I'm very tired, but at the moment, because the minimum wage is so low, I can't afford childcare not to work in sociable hours. So if it became that point, I wouldn't need any benefits as a single mother at all. I'd be able to afford my rent, which, as you say, there's no cap on privatisation of rent. So when I had to stay in the place I was, we upped it by £25 a month without even asking me. But as I had no choice and nowhere else to live, I had to sign. And as I said, I've been offered benefits. The only thing I would also say is when you sign contracts under 0 hours, then that's my problem. So even if you're on full-time hours, there would also need to be some sort of standard with having a set amount of hours, because as a parent, you can't live 1 week to have a full-time wage and next week to have 10.
Okay, part of the question, I'll start on the 0 hours contracts, which is absolutely pernicious and disastrous. And the fact is that they're not jobs you can build a life on. People have to pay their rent, they have to buy their food. And one of the factors that's just happened is that people who are going to food banks, there's more people in work going to food banks than people out of work. And one of the big factors is 0 hours contracts. And what we say is quite simply ban 0 hours contracts. What they've got in Germany is a system whereby if you have a contract, a quarter of your hours can be flexible. So that allows, your employer to have a certain amount of flexibility, but you've got 3/4 of your hours are guaranteed. And one of the other things about 0 hours contracts that's really absolutely dreadful and pernicious is the opportunities for bullying and abuse that you have. Because you often have, say in a retail shop, the charge hand who's on 20p an hour more than you are on the minimum wage on a 0 hours contract. And they decide who gets 0 hours, who gets 20 hours, who gets 40 hours a week. And that person has enormous power. And the potential for abusing that power, the potential for favouritism or even worse, is absolutely dreadful. And actually one of the other things is, how do you actually live your life like this on 0 hours contracts? I was at Oxford University talking to a guy who said his mate, and he just left Oxford University, he came from a pretty privileged kind of place. He was on a 0 hours contract where he got a phone call at 6 o'clock every morning to tell him if he was working that day or not. So he had to be up, ready, and he'd get a call, and it was either yes, there's work today, or no, there's no work today, go and find something else to do for the day. And that's no way that people can live their lives. And we're up to, there's different figures on this, but there's somewhere between 1 and 4 million people in Britain on 0 hours contracts. And one of the things that's happened is it started out in kind of retail and manufacturing and fairly basic jobs. But now there's lots of, I was talking to the UCU, the Further Education Union. There's a huge number of further education lecturers, people with a lot of qualifications and experience, who are on 0 hours contracts. And they're only paid for a number of contact hours they have with their students. So they have to do all of the preparation, all of the marking, all the other stuff that's essential for keeping up with things in their own time. And it's spreading out into medical services, it's spreading out into accounting and all sorts of professional levels. And if we're not careful, we'll have a whole society that's a 0 hours contract society. So we say simply ban them, say that you have to have some kind of flexibility in the final quarter, but 3/4 it should be there. And I think what you said about the £10 an hour, what we actually had was we started off with a minimum wage that was at a fairly decent level, but the Labour Party over its term in office allowed the minimum wage to slide down in real terms. And what they did was they topped it up with family tax credit and housing benefit. And that was actually corporate welfare. That was actually money going into the profits, often of big companies, because it's a basic criteria of a worker that you have to continue to live. It's kind of assumed that you will have a shower most days and that you won't be sleeping on a grate outside the shop. You actually need to pay those living costs. But if your employer's not paying you enough money to pay those living costs, and the government's subsidising, it's actually the employer's profits that are being subsidised, it's corporate welfare. And of course what we've seen since this government came in is the welfare has been slashed away, and people have been left just in absolute penury on inadequate wages. The benefits have started to disappear, and people are just left absolutely stuck. So we need a living wage as an absolute standard to start off with, and jobs you can build a life on, a sense of security, some kind of future, because that's what we all need individually, but we also need that as a society.
I'm going to do a positive now. Go on then. Thinking we're just over it and not, right? Yeah. I have a company that will be 20 years in the running, a local company that employed quite a lot of people around here for 20 years. Okay, and this zero contract was the reason we stopped it, because the new contract I would have to undertake, I would have had to have people on 0 hours. Wrong. You guys need to throw it out there. Forget its medical staff, forget its doctors. Every man and every woman has the right to know what they're taking home at the end of the week. At the end of the week. They don't need to be thinking like, oh, am I going to be doing 1 day? Am I going to be doing 2 days? I'm going to do a full week. They need to know. That's why I never went into it. I stopped an income for myself because I didn't agree with what that does to my staff, and it was wrong. And you guys need to pummel that up. It doesn't matter what trade you are, what service you provide. Everyone has got the right that they should know. If you're in a job, you should have either, if you start off and agree to a 3-day week, fine. But if you've got a family to provide for, you need that knowledge that you're going to take that money home. And that's
You've had to go. The lady in the middle has been waiting for a long time.
£10 an hour, is that not £40,000 a year?
Well counted-ish, but hold on, I'll take the lady in the middle, and then I'll take Gary, who's been waiting for a long time.
Yeah, not all women have as loud a voice as I do, so let's have some fun.
Okay, so we will have a break soon, and we will then come back and we can have more discussions about the living wage. Bloke in the corner who's ignoring me. So that, no worries. Okay, we'll have a break, and you'll have a chance to come back later, but people haven't had a chance to ask a question.
Okay.
Go on then.
The living wage, if you put that in, how is that going to affect middle income? Because employers aren't going to raise everyone's wages. Obviously, cost is going to go up.
I do 12
It's
to
going to affect
15
middle
hours
income more than it is the rich.
every day. I've done for the last
The question was, will raising the minimum wage to a living wage hit the middle group? And I think that there's some work to be done on this, and I've been talking to people a lot about this recently. And the problem, what we've actually seen happening, is that the minimum wage has increasingly become the wage for everybody. And it's slid down, and we actually need to restore the kind of the gradations. And one of the big things the Green Party talks about is rebalancing our economy away from big multinationals that so often don't pay their taxes and don't pay their staff, back to small businesses, local cooperatives, strong local economies, so a different kind of economy, a different kind of business. And the really extreme example of this is, if you think of, it didn't get much publicity, but Azerden, Asda recently sacked all of its managers, and Asda stores are now going to be basically entirely run by people who would be charged hands at best. So they'll be on a few pence, maybe 20, 40p over the minimum wage, and all the management will be done from head office. And that's the extreme natural end of the multinational big chain business. And that, we won't be able to run our society like that, it just won't work. What we actually need to do is make big multinational companies pay their taxes, pay their staff fairly, make them obey the law and pay their suppliers on time. And if you do that, you actually start to break the business model and you restore strong local economies. And if you do that, you've got lots more opportunities for small business. So if you think about, if you go and spend £1 in a local greengrocer, then she will probably employ a local accountant to do her books. When she's got a new lease, she'll employ a local solicitor. When she needs a new sign, she'll employ a local sign writer. When she needs some new shelves, she'll employ a local carpenter. And so then there's a whole lot of business opportunities, a whole lot of different jobs, all there in the local economy. And that carpenter, who's a skilled person, small business person, should be able to get a decent wage. So it's pretty well impossible to force big companies to have wage gradations all the way through. But we actually need to restructure our economy away from those big multinational companies, back towards much smaller businesses, and have local economies where the money goes round and round in the local economy. Because if you go and spend £1 on that bag of apples, say in Tesco's or Sainsbury's or somewhere like that, then actually, at most a couple of pence will stay here in Leighton Buzzard. In fact, probably less, because there'll be one person on a minimum wage looking after 6 self-service tills. So practically none of the money stays here. It swooshes off out of town and quite likely off into the nearest tax haven. So we actually need to restructure all of our economy. And that's where it actually fits with the environmental stuff as well. Because we actually need to make many more things locally, we need to grow much more of our food locally, we need to restore the way in which secure food supplies happen. And all of that means just an entirely different kind of economy to the economy we've got now. And that's where, in those businesses, you've got those gradations of pay.
Thank you. We're going to have a short break now, but before we have a break, we always have an advert. So can I suggest...
recyclable glass.
One of the recyclable beer by the looks of it as well. What we have is we have 2 parliamentary candidates were selected this week. We have a parliamentary candidate for Milton Keynes South, Sam Pancari, come to the front. And the Green Party parliamentary candidate for Milton Keynes North, Jenny Markley. Come on. I just want to say, it's brilliant that actually in Milton Keynes we've got 2 people who are very new members of the Green Party, who are both certainly under my age, which is not difficult. But I just wondered if you wanted to say a couple of words and perhaps ask Natalie a question about why you joined the Green Party and what you think they could be doing.
Thanks. I joined the Green Party largely because of someone in this room actually. I was feeling very unhappy about the situation in this country, the way the economy is set up, the way wealth is distributed, the way things are being privatised, all of these things. And I was talking about my opinions was told that my views aligned really nicely with the Green Party. So I should probably investigate what they were doing. Because I'd always thought they were one issue party. Or I thought it was about the environment. And so I investigated, I liked what I read, and I joined, and I got involved in the local party, and it's been fantastic. It's been a roller coaster, but I'm very proud to be a member of the Green Party, and I'm very honoured to be able to represent the Green Party in Milton Keynes.
My journey to joining the Green Party was fairly similar. I had been, and this may go down quite badly in this room, I don't know, I had been a staunch Liberal Democrat supporter and voter for my entire voting life. Felt very upset with how they had behaved since joining the coalition government. Felt like they very much let down their grassroots supporters and what they said they stood for. I filled out an online survey, who should you vote for, sort of thing, and came back with the results saying you match 87% with the Green Party.
Oh no, you can't do that.
The hippies. Having similarly to Jenny, always thought of them as being the environmental party, but the single issue party. Went and looked at the website, and it was almost a revelation, kind of these are my people, this is where I belong. It was quite extraordinary. I saw a button at the bottom of the page that said get involved. I thought, go on then, what does this mean? And was taken to the joining page. I thought, oh my god, you can do that. I didn't realise you could just join. Next morning, Mr. Mabbitt comes knocking at my front door. Do you want to come out leafleting with us? And that was that. Here we are. Here we are since then, and it has been extremely exciting. Actually getting involved with politics. It's something that I've talked about, I've ranted about, I've blogged about for a couple of years. But actually being involved with it and feeling that I'm now part of something that I think is going to be a really big, very positive change is absolutely fantastic. I love every member of it, especially very family.
I'm sure you're aware, I think you may have visited what's going on in Parliament Square at the moment with the Occupy democracy. Pretty horrendous things going on from our leaders, and
Okay, well, for anyone who didn't hear that, we're talking about Occupy, which is now on Parliament Square, or at least I think it still is. I haven't caught up with the news this afternoon. I was actually at Occupy speaking on Saturday afternoon, just before Russell Brand, who I seem to have been following around quite a bit lately. And the atmosphere was tense. There was a lot of police around, but they were kind of holding back. It's since got far worse, and many of you might know that Jenny Jones, our London Assembly and House of Lords member, and Caroline Lucas, Green MP, were there yesterday. And you might have also heard tell of Plinth Man, who was occupying the plinth underneath the Churchill statue. Jenny and Caroline were told that if they supplied any food or water to Plinth Man, they would be arrested for obstructing police. So the British state is denying food and water to an entirely peaceful protester and threatening the democratic representatives who want to support him. It's an absolute disgrace, but I think it's also for us a powerful opportunity to demonstrate how much has gone wrong with our democracy, and for us to speak up loudly and clearly in support of Occupy, in support of everyone else who's taking peaceful, non-violent, direct action. Because to change this society, and many of you will know that Caroline Lucas was arrested at Balcombe in an anti-fracking protest, that we have to sometimes be prepared to put our body on the line. And I don't expect everyone to do that, I don't ask everyone to do that, but I praise the people who do.
Please, just a few questions. I've got one already stored up. If you want to ask any more questions of the leader of the Green Party, put your hands at the end now so I've got an idea of who wants to ask anything. Loads of people, excellent. So, first of all, Gary.
Well, my question goes to the sort of heart of democracy in this country itself, I suppose. Great Britain always puts itself forward as being the ideal model of democracy in the Western world. I personally don't believe that our system is particularly democratic at all. Our head of state is from a hereditary system. It's based on who you're born to rather than merit, and our second chamber of Parliament is made up of a large proportion of hereditary peers. So again, I've got no, there's no system of merit on terms of how it's just purely on their birth. And we can also have a government who's in charge of the country, who can be elected with as little as sort of 35 to 40% of the electorate voting for it. How does the Green? Do we need a second? Why do we need a second chamber of Parliament? And what does the Green Party? What can the Green Party do to reinstill real democracy to this our political system?
Okay. Well, did everyone sort of hear the question? Okay, right. It was about democratic reform, and there's sort of two levels of it. One of which is we've long been calling for a fully elected proportional representation House of Lords. The same thing, proportional representation in the Commons. But we're at an exciting moment now with after the Scottish referendum, because the only way they won the Scottish referendum was by promising Devo Max to the Scottish people. What that means is extremely unclear. They have this mad idea that somehow or other by November, next month, they're going to have the plan worked out how to do all of this, and that they're going to have legislation before the Parliament, before May. That's not going to happen. And so there's going to be a huge opportunity, a huge pressure for electoral reform, because the Scottish question has to be answered. I mean, the Scottish people, and basically everyone knows they'll have another referendum soon if they don't get their devolution. And so there's an opportunity now, and what the Green Party is calling for. We've got lots of ideas about what we should do, but rather than us saying it, what we're calling for is a People's Constitutional Convention. So that would be a convention made up of a majority of ordinary people, drawn at random from around the country, put together with the resources and the expert advice and the help they need to actually draw up from scratch a new British Constitution. Because the fact is, Westminster, it's astonishing when you think about it, it hasn't been reformed in nearly 100 years. The last big change at Westminster was women getting the vote in 1918, and nothing has really changed significantly since then. So it's really too late to tinker with it. We really need to start again and have a whole written constitution. And one of the things that, as an example of the kind of things that would be really exposed by that process, there's an official called the Remembrancer, and he's the official representative of the City of London. Now, the City of London, in its own terms, on its own website, says it exists to promote the financial sector and liberalisation. And the Remembrancer is the only non-MP allowed on the floor of the House of Commons. He gets to see all legislation as it's being drawn up. The finance sector has a special place at the heart of government. Now, I think if you actually started to write the Constitution down and look at it, the financial sector will have a special representative that the manufacturing sector and the NHS and OAPs and no one else has. The ink will just fly off the page in incredulity at that. So you could actually, by starting again and writing it all down, you could really get somewhere very different. And you know, we talk about it as the mother of all parliaments, but when you think about it, it hasn't changed in 100 years. Maybe 100 years ago, it was kind of leading the world, but we've now been horribly left behind.
Tony. Oh, thank you.
I'm sure you want to.
I was tempted to ask you a really nasty local issue question.
In which case I'll throw it straight to my left.
Right, and he doesn't know either. You know, but I mean, it's a practical question really. Having sat here and watched you in a pub that you've not been in before ever, it's actually full of drinkers, including one or two people shouting a bit too loudly at the bar, as opposed to your own local pub surrounded by security guards and a stage managed kind of here I am kind of way. I'm really impressed. My practical question is, given our two new candidates in Milton Keynes, who are both young and brilliant, is if you're thrown a question about a local issue that you know nothing about,
How do you answer that?
There's kind of two ways of doing this, one of which is quite risky and one of which is quite dull. I'm going to anonymise where this was, but there was a place where I went to without any briefing at all, and they just plonked me down with the local paper. And the local paper said, "What do you think about this bypass?" And I kind of went, hell, bypass has to be a bad idea. New roads are really bad, you know, and it was taking a bit of a punt. And so one way of doing it is to actually rely on the kind of principles that the Green Party, and actually 95% of the time that will be right. 5% of the time you're taking a risk and you can get it horribly wrong. So you have to make a call that decides whether you take the risk or whether you just go play the safe. I'm sorry, I'm from London, I haven't been informed about that. Can I get back to you? And it's a matter of making a call on that. And it kind of depends how important it is. And also, some things, like say for example, solar farms. Now the Green Party is kind of 95% in favour of solar farms as a general principle. But there are some of them that have been trying to be put in the wrong place, just in places that are inappropriate. So I wouldn't take a punt on a solar farm without knowing the local story first. So it's a matter of judgment, really. There's no easy answer to that one. And the other one is always, go, well, that's a really interesting question, and I think it opens up a wider issue about fuel. That's the other way of doing it.
Thank you. Can I have any more questions, please? Last call for questions. I will take the chap with the green t-shirt and then the woman with the spangly necklace.
Given that we've just had, or we still have 4.5 years of a coalition government, and you've already rightly pointed out that the next election could be more fluid and more open than we possibly could wildly believe. What will be your view if you win in Camden and 4 or 5 others win in Norwich, etc., etc., and we end up with about 4 or 5? Do you look at going into a coalition and become hard-nosed negotiators, or do you take things on a piecemeal, bit by bit, issue by issue basis, or do you enter into hard-nosed negotiations, putting a large proportion of Green Party policy into place?
Okay, first thing I'd say is I can't imagine circumstances in which we prop up a Tory government.
No.
So what we're talking about is a relationship with the Labour Party and maybe a coalition involving the Labour Party. And our first inclination would not be to form a coalition, but to do what's known as a confidence and supply agreement, which basically means you agree to provide stable government. You won't vote in favour of a no confidence motion unless something really gross has happened, but in normal circumstances you won't support a no confidence motion, and you'll let the budget through. And so that means the government and minority government can continue, but you don't become member of the coalition. So what that means is then on anything but a confidence and supply agreement, you can vote according to your conscience. You're not tied, as the Lib Dems have been, to always voting with the government. So if, for example, to pick an example out of the air, tuition fees came up, we would just simply vote for zero, put an amendment, say we're voting for zero tuition fees, and not vote for anything else. And so that enables you basically, you don't get the ministerial cars. If you're part of the coalition, you would get someone would get a ministerial car. You don't get that, but you get to keep your conscience. And in terms of delivering green policies, what you do is to say, the conditions for letting the budget through are, for example, we want these 3 things. The energy bill revolution to insulate every home that needs it. We want investment in renewables, and we want to make the minimum wage a living wage, and there are our 3 conditions for letting the budget through. Now, you then got to do the horse, there is still horse trading. There's got to be horse trading at some stage in there, and you would expect to win some things out of that horse trading. And it gets really tough, because you've got to be realistic. We'd love to put no Trident in there, but I can't see a government that would, a minority government that would accept no Trident. So you've got to work with what's possible.
Right, we haven't got long because Natalie has to get back to London. Thank you very much for coming tonight. It's really appreciated, and everyone who's been involved, including those people who've been more lively than others and more perhaps critical than others. It's great because actually what we want and what we believe in is discussion. Politics has basically not moved on from the from the 19th century, where basically we've actually we believe in debate and discussion, and yet the whole of modern politics, the whole of three-party establishment parties, is about a system whereby it's all about media management. It's all about the same white blokes in suits saying pointing at certain parts of the market. And it's very important to see a wide range of people from all over this part of Bedfordshire and Milton Keynes and even North Bedfordshire as well, to see people actually saying what they think, and actually we're going to develop our policy, because actually one of the things about politics is about listening to people as well as talking, at which point I'll probably stop talking, because Pete here is going to say something. Yes.
Ladies and gentlemen, as you probably know, you've got your two parliamentary candidates from Milton Keynes here. You've also got Tony and Ken, who are going to stand in Leighton and Linslade. Unlike the other political parties, we don't have big business backing us, we don't have trade unions backing us, and you will notice that I've got a very small hat. I did say it's a small hat. And if anybody would like to make a donation towards the evening, towards the local campaign, all donations would be gratefully received, and I'll be moving amongst the flock fairly soon. And what I'd like to do is make sure that I don't hear it drop in the bottom, if you get my drift.
Thank you. And while Pete is moving amongst you mysteriously, I'll ask Sam for the final question of the evening.
Yeah, just in the wake of the Scottish referendum and the huge surge of membership that the Scottish Greens have seen, and as Scotland are now staying part of the United Kingdom, I wonder what you made of the suggestion that the Scottish Greens and the Green Party of England and Wales should unite themselves, become a big united Green Party.
Okay, well, it's worth going into the history of this, because the Scottish Green Party became separate in 1990, so it's a fairly recent thing, and they supported independence in the referendum, so I don't think they'd be up for that idea. But that doesn't mean that we can't work closely together, and indeed we already do. And there are possibly going to be some very interesting things happening in Scotland in the coming general election, and I'm actually quite hopeful that we might see at least one Scottish Green MP in Westminster. Politics up there is very fluid at the moment, so who knows where it will end up. But we'll continue to work closely with them. They're out, as we work indeed with the Northern Ireland Greens. We're all part of the team, and we're all part of the European Green Party as well. And we can all learn from each other and learn from each other's experiences and share those skills. And that's something we're seeing happening increasingly around the world. It was quite exciting in the European election. There were several Australians who came over here on the classic gap year, but they've been working for the Australian Green Party, and they explicitly came here to see the European election and take part in our campaign. And we can learn a lot from that kind of, mixing globalisation, good globalisation, if you call it. So, we can all work together without actually being the same institution.
I think it leaves me to say thank you very much for coming. Natalie, thank you very much. It's been a pleasure walking around Linslade and Leighton Buzzard with you today, and speaking to people outside of school, speaking to people outside the railway station. It's been the best response we've had outside the railway station today. It's been absolutely marvellous, because people are actually telling us what they think, some of which we don't agree with, but also listening to what we have to say. Politics is about listening to people and build. If we're going to make a difference and make a change, then we have to actually listen and engage. And so thank you everyone for taking part tonight. Thank you very much, Natalie. Have a safe journey home, and see you next time.